hello everybody. My name is Fiona Blades and I'm the President and Chief Experience Officer of Mesh Experience, a consultancy that measures the whole customer experience, and therefore we can help our clients with their marcoms, their customer experience, and their path to purchase investment decisions. And today I am delighted to also welcome, because I have with me our co-host, Dana Di Gregorio, our Global Managing Director, and also Natasha Polston, Experience Executive, who is running our vegan tracker.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, today we are joined by some fabulous guests. We've got Professor Hugh Wilson and Griffin Spolansky, and we are going to dive into episode 1 of the Vegan Meshup webinar series, which we have entitled Mind the Gap today. So a warm welcome to everybody who has joined and who are joining us now. And I'd love if you could just tell me in the chat, because we've got a global audience, where are you calling in from? And if you do have a vegan product, let us know. I know there are lots of people joining from, different categories. So listen, as we go through some of the content, please do get in touch if there's something that you'd like us to dive in deeper further. We're going through the first flash of this data, but there is loads more to come. I hope you're going to enjoy the next hour. I know I will, because we've had so much fun preparing for it, but feel free to pop any questions or thoughts into the Q&A and or chat boxes, and we're going to try to answer them live, but we're also going to have a little bit of time for Q&A after the webinar begins. So Fiona, let's talk a little bit about why we decided to set up this vegan tracker. Maybe move to the next slide here. Thank you. So, all right, first and foremost, guys, the vegan market is growing, as we know. In the US, the vegan food market has reached $17 billion in 2020. That's a lot of zeros. And it's forecasted to grow double digits in the next 5 years. It's bonkers. Tell us a little bit about the UK.
You wait till you hear this about the UK, Dana. So in the UK, 500,000 Brits signed up to Veganuary in 2021. Deliveroo's vegan orders spiked by 163% in 2020. 7.2 million British adults currently follow a meat-free diet, with 13 million expected to be meat-free by the end of this year. And the number of vegans in the UK has increased by 40%, over the past 12 months, and vegans and vegetarians are set to make up a quarter of the British population in 2025. And if the 2 million people who intend to become vegan this year actually do so, then the number of vegans will increase by 132%. Phew, I mean, that is some rapid growth, and it's something that we all need to be taking note of. It also plays into the wider sustainability agenda. And this is something that I know is very dear to the hearts of both Tasha and Professor Hugh Wilson. And Hugh and his colleague at Warwick Business School, Professor Emma MacDonald, are both going to COP26 this year, and we'll be introducing Emma in the next webinar. So we're going to be really excited to hear what Hugh and Emma come back with from that experience.
Oh my gosh, yes, local celebrities here going to make a difference. I love it. Well, in the US, COP26 and the infrastructure bill that President Biden is looking to pass are pretty big news. We've got a number of climate change related storms. We have heat waves and fires this year. Sustainability is only going to become a bigger and bigger, and rightfully so, a huge topic of discussion. So finally, what are some of the last reason we decided to do this vegan tracker is because we're vegan. Fiona and I really wanted to do a passion project. We are both vegan, and we're really excited to learn about this market and continue to grow here. So Fiona, passing it back to you, tell us a little bit about what we're going to cover today.
Okay, so thank you, Dana. Well, we've chosen the topic, Mind the Gap, and this is because it works for both the two key sections that we're going to be covering today in the Vegan Meshup. So in the first, Tasha is going to be sharing data from our vegan tracker, and she's going to identify some really fascinating and fairly stark gaps that marketers would do well with being aware of. And then both Tasha and Hugh are going to be talking about some of the implications of these findings. In the second part, as you know, Dana, you're going to be speaking to Griffin about the gap that he identified in the plant-based protein bar market. And then we're also going to be revealing our product of the month. But first, let me share with you the vegan ad of the month that I absolutely love. So I'm hoping Tasha can get this live for us. It's from Wagamama, which is a fantastic chain of restaurants in the UK. I think we may have lost Mama. Should we give it another go?
Internet, we're back. Where did you get to, Fiona?
Okay, so I think we got to Vegemama was about to kind of career into some buildings. Why don't we just do the last 30 seconds so we can kind of see what did Vegemama do? There we go. Let's do this.
Vegemama, stop. I know you're mad. I'm mad too. But eating more plants is one of the most powerful things we can do to help our planet. Okay.
I love that ad. Does anybody else just really think Vegemama is so cute? Because I really do. But I love it.
Absolutely. Well, we did try that, and there were no technical hitches in the rehearsal. So, but we can make sure you have the link later if you want to look at Vegemama again. But it was a great ad. At this point, I'm delighted to introduce everyone to Tasha Polston. Tasha joined Mesh Experience with a history degree and is absolutely passionate about sustainability. And in fact, she's already been ensuring that with many of our clients that we're putting relevant sustainability questions into our long-standing trackers with them. And she's actually been leading some of our own initiatives, such as the Mesh Walkathon. So welcome, Tasha. I'm also incredibly pleased that Professor Hugh Wilson is joining us today. And I've actually been lucky enough to work with Hugh and his colleague, Professor Emma MacDonald, for over 10 years now. And Hugh and Emma have been absolutely instrumental to building Mesh and our analytics capabilities. They recognized that our real-time experience tracking approach would be able to help clients to be able to get deeper into understanding some of the big business issues. And actually together we've won a couple of government grants, and that has actually resulted in us being finalists for 2 UK Innovation Awards during this time. So it's an absolute pleasure, and welcome to you, Hugh.
Thanks very much. Hello.
Well, first of all, let's just briefly talk about what this methodology is so that we understand where the data is coming from. So perhaps we can go on to the next slide just to kind of go through how the real-time experience tracking works. And it's a 3-stage process for each of our participants. So first of all, we recruit through an online panel normally. And then people answer a short survey, And in that survey, we understand their brand perceptions and their category perceptions. And in this case, we understand their attitudes towards veganism and plant-based foods. Then we ask them for the next week to be researchers as they go about their everyday life and to tell us whenever they see, hear, or experience certain brands or certain categories. And in this case, we're looking for people to report on plant-based and vegan experiences as they're coming across them in the moment. They do that for a week, and then at the end of the study, we ask them some of the same questions that we've asked at the beginning of the week, so we can see how open they are to veganism, for example. And then we can compare that with what they were saying at the beginning of the week and look at the experiences that may have impacted on that change in their beliefs. So that's a little bit about the overall approach. But Tasha, would you like to talk us through what this meant for this particular study?
Of course, just tell me if you lose me. I think our internet is being a bit funny today, so I apologise for that in advance. But yeah, as you can see with our vegan study, we've had nearly 700 people complete our pre within the UK, and it is nationally representative. Over 500 gone to complete our post, and this has provided over 2,000 extreme preferences. So we had a greater understanding of what was going on in the background with everybody. They answered everything. With our dietary preferences, we found them to be roughly in line.
I was going to say, maybe just take your video off to save on a little bit of bandwidth. There you go.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. Again,
That's
Wi-Fi is so touch work. But yep, so our dietary preferences, I'll just repeat that, are roughly in line with our UK norms. So around 80% of people have claimed to have either no dietary preference or are meat eaters. 6% are vegetarians and 2% are vegans. Our participants are open to veganism was a little bit more mixed. So we found that only 25% of people were open to veganism in the pre, and over 50% unfortunately were not. Our household questions gives some additional data actually on over 1,000 people, which is something that we'll dive into later. We also ask our participants to provide some photos of their diary week. This just enriches our understanding of what our participants are seeing, hearing, and interacting with on a daily basis. So just to give you quickly reiterate and display how this methodology really works in real time for our participants is that they undertake their pre-survey first of all, where they answer questions around their openness to veganism, 3 words that they associate with veganism, and their household composition. This then moves into the diary where they record experiences detailing any interaction they have had with veganism. This participant records these as categories and as touch points. So for example, eating a vegan meal at home would be recorded as the food category and the me consuming / using touch point. At this time, they could provide a photo as well if they would like. Then lastly, they then undertake their post survey, which has a similar look and feel to the pre, doesn't it, Fiona?
It does. So what I really want to know now, Tasha, is what was the first thing that struck you when you looked at the data?
I have to say, I think the first thing that struck me was the significant difference between how younger and older people consider veganism. For the purpose of this data, we chose to split the demographics into 18 to 34s and over 35s. So I input the different ages reaction to the question, please write 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word vegan into a word cloud generator. And as you can see, the differences are extremely stark. We've seen that younger people are inherently more positive towards the concept of veganism than the older demographic. Over 35's repeated use of phrases such as difficult, faddish, fussy and boring really contrasts with the younger people's claims of it being healthy, sustainable, green and ethical. Isn't that crazy to you, Fiona?
It is. I mean, it's so stark, this. Hugh, I want to know what you think about it. What's coming through when you see this?
Well, I was surprised as well. I mean, you know, we expect some correlation with things like age, don't we? But such a very dramatic contrast is kind of unusual. You know, we've got, obviously from the big words, we've got healthy on one side, healthy and natural, versus boring. And if you look at the small print, unhealthy on the other side. For you know, us oldies, you know, words like malnourished, underweight and pale, which is unusual, isn't it? Because, you know, as marketers, it's rather nice to have a segmentation like this, but more commonly, segments annoyingly cross demographic boundaries, don't they? But it's helpful for targeting. Clearly, there are going to be exceptions, but 35 pluses, above all, we want to make sure that the products are enticing as well as satisfying in the case of food and drink. And under 35s, there's still a danger, if you look at the small print, of it being bland and tasteless. So that's a common message, but they're more open to, you know, as it were, moral messaging around environment and animal welfare, as well as health messaging. But we have to be careful, because that moral messaging is a positive turn-off for many over 35s. You know, all those words in there like faddish, extreme, overbearing, cranks, weird, restrictive. I think there's a kind of social identity thing going on here, isn't there? You know, vegans are, for some of us oldies, vegans are them. Those young, you know, those young, faddish, strange people, not us. So as brands, we want to avoid being put in the kind of them camp by avoiding preaching or in any way coming across as cultish, Fiona.
So thank you. I mean, it's just so much out of a simple word cloud here. But Tasha, what else did you notice to do with age when you were looking at this analysis? What else is coming through?
So actually, when I dived deeper into the age analysis, I found a really interesting gap for the over 35s on the difference between their perceptions of veganism and their actual experiences of veganism, hence mind the reality gap. However, just before we properly dive into these differences between perceptions versus reality, first let's just take a really quick look at the category experiences, share of experience and reach. For category experience, perhaps entirely unexpectedly or expectedly, the category of food has a far higher share of experience and reach than any other category. This is followed by beverages, by grocery retailers, and then by beauty products. For touchpoint experiences, they are far more varied, with in-store experiences having the highest reach and share of experience across the touchpoints. But as you can see, it's a lot more shallow. So the next in line is the touchpoint me consuming / using, which again, not overly surprising, but I found that online and TV also have a higher share of experience when comparing it to other touchpoints, such as seeing someone else consume or having a personal conversation. Therefore, we can just clearly understand where our participants are interacting most with veganism. So when you take these experiences and then segment them by their ages, I've put them back into another word cloud so that you can see the 35 plus age groups perception against their reality. We can again see how stark these differences are. Their responses go from being about how veganism, it's a fad, it's a lifestyle, it's an existence based around how it makes the person difficult or restrictive or unhealthy, to emphasizing actually how surprised and indeed impressed and interested they are with their vegan experiences. In the moment diary experiences for this age group show pleasant surprise at vegan products and encounters, being more focused around this concept of sensory descriptors such as taste and sight. I think this is the most significant and noticeable impact in this difference between feeling like it is an identity and perception to being focused more around the senses in an experience. Don't you find that interesting as well, Fiona?
Yes, I do. I really like this slide because it just shows the difference between if you ask somebody a question and then what's happening in the real world and they're interacting. But Hugh, how would you explain from a marketing perspective, you know, what's really going on here between this difference in asking and then people reporting in real time?
Well, I'm not sure, but my hypothesis is back to social identity. If you're filling in a survey on a Saturday and you're a respondent on one of the panel providers, you know, what identities are triggered there? Maybe I'm a dad in my case, and, you know, veganism, it's them, it's the, you know, young things like my son, you know. social identity radically shifts from moment to moment, depending on where we are. So in the week, there I am out and about, and a lot of these vegan experiences are out and about, aren't they? In restaurants and supermarkets and so on. There I might be different. I might be a happy Berkhamsted resident, having a great drink with mates after work. If they're musical mates, I'm a musician. If I'm talking to Michael on the call, I'm a musician as well as a marketer. So different. This is often an explanation as to why a survey picks up such different results from your clever method, Fiona, of asking people to report in real time.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, certainly I do think that it also shows some hope, from those more negative types of responses that people were giving to actually what's really going on here.
Right.
And could we actually take a look, do you think, Tasha, at a real participant and how this is working as they're going through it? I'd love to see how that's working.
Yeah, and I think your idea around hope, we will definitely see in this example. So we've taken the participant who we have named Liz. We can clearly see is actually a noticeable shift from pre to post. So Liz begins her journey on day one by taking the pre and claiming to not be open to veganism at all, and believes the 3 words she most associates with veganism to be vegetables, tasteless, and a fad. It's really clear from this response that Liz is not positive towards veganism and thinks of it as something that has bland food and is bound to go away with time. However, she then undergoes her diary week. On day 2 of her diary, Liz had an experience concerning the category food, in which she saw an advert for the brand Vegetarian Butcher. This advert made her curious about the twist of a concept of a butcher and wanted to find out more about the plant-based products that they offer. Following this, on day 4, Liz's experience was an interaction with a household product called Dettol Power, a plant-based cleaning spray. Her neutral response here stems from her uncertainty and her curiosity concerning how a cleaning product could be plant-based. Really interestingly though, day 5, Liz has the same experience again. She sees the exact same advert for the cleaner spray Dettol Power. This time, however, she finds it far more positive and even indicates how she was curious to try it. She was interested in how it would smell, again, those senses coming in, and how effective as a cleaning spray it would be. Her final diary experience, Liz saw an advert for Via Life cocoa spread for vegans. This advert appealed to her sweet tooth, again, senses, the taste, and how it made her very inclined to want to try it. It's clear by the end of her diary week that Liz no longer sees vegan food as being a fad or bland. In her post response, the 3 words she now most associates with being vegan are committed, healthy, and principled. As we can see, Fiona, Liz also now fully agreed that being vegan is not just great for the environment, not just great for animal welfare, not just great for sustainability, but it's also a very good reason to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
That's really interesting. And how is this actually playing out, Tasha, when you go back to looking at some of those different categories? Can we have a look at that?
Yes, so in this section, Mind the Beauty and Beverage Gap, we can actually see category experiences having a real impact. So just for the purpose of a brief understanding here, our bubble size is indicative of reach. So the bigger the reach, the bigger the bubble. The further along the x-axis you go, the more positive that our participants found these experiences. And on the y-axis, the more persuasive, the higher it goes. So now we can see our category experience map and really understand it. We can see that food may be generating the highest reach, but it's not necessarily the most positive or persuasive category in the market. Beauty products are generating the most highly engaging experiences, with beverages not that far behind. I think really interestingly here is that this isn't just something that we see in a total level, but also when we break it down to our over 35s and our 18 to 34s. Both found beauty experience is to be the most engaging category. I know you found this to be particularly interesting, Fiona.
Yes, and I'm wondering whether the beauty category kind of holds a little bit of a clue here, particularly for the 35 plus, when you're thinking about them responding really positively. Were you able to have a dig down into what was going on with these beauty experiences, Tasha?
Yeah, so I did spend some time looking over our beauty category experiences, and I read through our open-ended responses to really gauge why people felt so positively. I think a trend that we've now seen pop up over the course of this webinar is the surprise factor that people are feeling when having these interactions with vegan experiences. The beauty category experiences are actually just no different to this. Our participants are more than just pleasantly surprised to find that some of their favourite brands and products are vegan without them ever having noticed before. It's helping to create a sense of goodwill, and as though they are actually doing a good deed for buying a product that not only is great for environmentalism and sustainability, but is animal cruelty free as well. I think another important and noteworthy thing to point out here is that people are noticing that these beauty products are just as effective as non-vegan ranges. We have good reviews, we have people who might be surprised at how great their skincare regime has become. The cause of it being sustainable and animal friendly is all well and good, but as long as the products actually work, don't we find this, Hugh?
Yeah, I agree. As always in sustainability messaging, sustainability professionals come to us marketers and say, tell them it's the right thing to do. Well, that does sometimes work, but only if you're talking to a very specific segment, who already kind of believe that. If you're trying to be a mainstream brand, like Vegetarian Butcher, a Unilever brand, you tend to be better off putting emotional or instrumental benefits first. I think back to the 20 years of experience with hybrid cars. What ended up selling the most, if it's a small car like a Toyota Yaris, was it's fun. And, look at Tesla, it's cool. But the other thing clearly for beauty is, it's easy because you're not asking customers to change their behavior. So one suspects that's why they've got such a positive response to touch points. And unfortunately on carbon and on other environmental measures, we're now reaching the more difficult issues that do require consumers to change our behavior, flying less. So which is hard, isn't it? Particularly if you're trying to run an international company like Fiona.
Well, maybe this brings us on to the question of how can we close the gap? So it would be great just to kind of have a look at, what are the ways, what are the persuasive, engaging, relevant experiences that we can look at to help marketers?
I suppose, first of all, it might just be helpful to take a look at how touch points are performing in creating persuasive and positive experience for veganism across the market. I think with our touchpoint experience map here, the first thing to point out is that the touch points that are most directly interacting with vegan products are the most engaging to consumers. Me consuming / using and me purchasing are clearly the most positive and persuasive experiences across the touch points. However, I think rather interestingly, the touch points TV, newspaper / magazine and online are perhaps lower in positivity and persuasiveness than we often see. I think the disconnect here for me stems from having vegan experiences where you are directly eating or using the product helps to challenge previous notions concerning veganism in a way that reading about it on a newspaper or watching it on television just doesn't challenge these things in the same way. When we then go on to look at the touchpoint experience maps by age, the first thing that really grabs your attention is that the touchpoint in store is far more positive for the younger age group than for the older. The reverse, though, is true for social media, where it appears as though the older demographic finds social media to be far more engaging than for the younger demographic. For me, or rather looking into the diary experiences, we can see that this is based on knowledge. Many participants have highlighted that it was social media that are raising their awareness of different vegan products, and this is causing positivity. whereas the younger age demographic already seem more aware of these same products being advertised on social media and thus having less of an impact on them overall. However, both age groups seem to agree that the touch point me using/consuming is the most positive, which is to be expected, don't you think, Fiona?
Brilliant. Well, thank you for this data, Tasha. Perhaps we come off screen now for a moment. Also, thank you everyone for the questions. I can see there are lots coming in, and we will make sure that we've got time at the end for the Q&A. But just before we wrap up this session, it would be great, Hugh, to hear from you what your key takeaways are.
Well, for me overall, firstly, I'd say show, don't tell. Stay in theatre. You know, to focus on the more readily available experiential touch points in stores and food venues and so on. You know, those are the ones that are working best here, it seems, from all the data. Good old-fashioned sampling, for example. You know, it's you know, look and taste, isn't it? And so the second one is address the hedonics first. Don't try and persuade cognitively, but, you know, does it look good? Does it taste good? Is the vegan belt attractive? You know, food and drink at least. Beauty is a little different, but food and drink is, you know, it's a low cognitive processing kind of category, isn't it? You know, food and drink have been around for billions of years. Our cognitive brains have been around for whatever, 100,000. You know, most, you know, we feel, we eat, and then we post-rationalize why that was a wonderful thing to eat. So, so that means my third takeaway really would be to focus education generally after purchase and not before. You know, if we want to educate our customers about, hey, look, this has got a low carbon footprint and make sure you do this and not that, we're more open once we've purchased, you know, to avoid that post-purchase cognitive dissonance thing, feeling we've done the wrong thing. We're more open to be talked to at that point, to be reassured, look, this is the right thing and this is why. If you're going to do things before the sale, lovely, but, you know, don't look at it as the main driver of trial. And above all, don't come across as preaching. I mean, it's easy to do by accident. I know marketers try not to preach, but, you know, even the term vegetarian butcher, that particular example of Liz came across well to that particular lady, but there were other examples, weren't there, Tasha, we were looking at the other day, where people felt, you know, hang on, my best mate's a butcher. Are you saying he's not a real butcher? It was triggering that us and them identity thing. So, yeah, go light on the cognitions and lead on hedonics, I think, at least until someone's bought.
Thank you, Hugh. And that, I think, also leads back to what you were saying, Tasha, with the beauty category, that people were actually delighted to know that what they were already buying had these values built in. So, you know, get vegan and plant-based products in people's hands. Thank you for that fantastic session. I know there's going to be more when we dive into the data in a couple of months' time. But now let me hand over to Dana, who is going to be introducing us all to Griffin. Over to you, Dana.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And yeah, I was just thinking, just to wrap up with what Hugh was saying, you know, efficacy versus preaching, and that brands should remember that, you know, vegan products aren't just for vegans, right? They're for everybody. So thank you for that. Griffin, welcome. I want to introduce our Product of the Month founder and CEO, Griffin Spolansky of Mezcla protein bars. Listen, if you guys haven't had the chance to try these delicious bars, you're missing out, but you are in luck because Griffin has kindly offered a discount code at the end of our webinar, but they are delicious. But Griffin, welcome to our chat. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy entrepreneurial morning to be here with us. And I have so many questions, but first, just tell us a little bit about you and your brand and how you decided to start it.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. Obviously happy to take the time out of my morning. And yeah, just for a little background on, you know, how Mezcla started, I was actually in a social entrepreneurship class at the University of Virginia, and we had a guest presenter. Her name was Coco Zatello, and she immigrated from Mexico about 15 plus years ago. And what was interesting is she was actually making and selling granola to the local community in Charlottesville, Virginia. And she was integrating ingredients from her hometown in Mexico into the granola. And for me, automatically a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, wow, granola hasn't seemed really exciting to me in the past, but this is a really unique and artisanal take on a pretty generic snacking product. So I actually ran outside of the class when she finished presenting, and we just started forming a friendship around food. I would go over to her house literally like 3-4 times a week, and we would do everything from like make granola to make protein bars to chips. And the whole goal was to make these products with artisanal flavors. And that's really how Mezcla started. And where we are today is, you know, we're a plant-based product that brings artisanal flavors and exciting textures to the snacking space. And our first product is in the protein bar space. And we're actually calling ourselves a puff crispy bar because we are so different than the typical protein bar in the market.
Love that, a puff crispy bar. That makes a lot of sense because it is puffy and crispy. I love that. I just have a really quick question before I go on to something else. So prior to having this moment at UVA with your guest speaker, did you have any affinity for cooking or food, or were you interested in that at all?
Yeah, so I've loved food my whole life. So I'm from New York City, and my most positive experiences have always been around food. And truthfully, it hasn't been necessarily the food itself. It's been the experience I've had with others enjoying food.
Yeah.
And my goal coming out of college was to work at a restaurant and actually end up starting my own restaurant. And this just kind of took over because Walmart buyers caught wind of what we were doing. And we actually presented to them and ended up getting in, 700 Walmart stores. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to go work in a restaurant. Instead, I'm going to, pursue this full time. So that's a good question, Dana.
Yeah, that's amazing, because as you were talking, I was just really loving how just a moment of attentive observation can really trigger something. It can produce, creativity. It can spark a business idea. So I love that. Griffin, we've been talking a lot about this idea of minding the gap, right? And those perceptions that people have about plant-based foods or veganism and the products. Tell us a little bit about the perceptions versus reality challenges that you've encountered when launching your brand. For example, what obstacles in getting people to adopt or to try did you have, or are you still overcoming?
Yeah, so really interesting question. A few things. So one, we surveyed a good bit of our consumers. We probably got 500 responses. And what we found is that the majority of our consumers favor the words plant-based over vegan. And that was really interesting to hear and to see, because we always led with vegan. We thought that was a really strong way to lead and to kind of brand the product. But instead, people really like the word plant-based, and it's not as scary or intimidating of a word to them. So that was really interesting data to see. And then just to kind of corroborate what we were seeing earlier in the presentation, 90% of our customer base is literally between the ages of 18 and 34. So like your data could not be more spot on and cannot agree with our data more. So just really interesting to see that. So I guess, yeah, those are two interesting takeaways that I've seen, through our data.
Yeah, cool. Well, I was going to ask about the age gap. And it seems like that is true for your real world customers as well. So when you did your survey and you learned about this distinction between plant-based versus vegan, did you take that word off of your marketing or branding?
That's a great question. We actually are removing the word and replacing it with plant-based. Yeah. So
yes.
It's a big push for us, honestly, because and I might steal a little thunder here, Dana, but truthfully, it's all about, and I know this is the kind of the concept of the whole presentation, but it's all about showing the food and making it friendly and easy for consumers to pick up. Because the fact of the matter is, when they're at shelf, someone's taking 3 to 7 seconds to decide what they're picking up. And especially the protein bar wall, it's filled with products. So we're leading with food and plant-based to make it like really appetizing and also really friendly. Not scary / intimidating for the consumer. So
yeah, that's a really, really good point. Obviously, everybody, Griffin has done a lot of research, so like that. I'm also curious because as you talk about, plant-based, that was one of the things that came up when we were diving into our research. Maybe Fiona and Hugh, something for us to look into for future webinars is there a difference between maybe US and UK when it comes to the words that we use and the way that we describe certain types of foods. So that could be something interesting as well. Griffin, Hugh, talked a little bit about closing the gap, and you mentioned it as well, but I'm wondering, after kind of seeing this data, it's corroborated with some of the data that you've seen on your end. What are some of your key takeaways in terms of what brands could do or what your brand could do to help continue to close the gap for consumers?
Right. Well, I mean, look, I'm biased, but I think that our product is, the best product on the market, and we are plant-based, right? So I think the way to close the gap is to demo and to trial and to get the product into people's hands. Because once they try it, they're going to realize, wow, this is really good. This is even better than the animal-based options that I've been eating in the past, So for me, something that I've been really focused on is just getting this into people's hands and making sure that they're actually testing and trialing the product. And that's worked really well for us. And I think, truthfully, for most food brands that stand behind their product, that's what they should be doing, because I think that that's a really important way to get, continual consumers, essentially. So
yeah, that is what will close the gap, right? Having a really good tasting product that reaches, many different people.
Right. And I think you said it best, because conceptually, it's great to be plant-based. It's really good, for your body. It's really good for the world. But if people don't like how the food tastes, they're not going to eat it. So I think we have to lead with food, and then the other stuff, is important, but I think it comes second, truthfully.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, because another thing that I've noticed about your brand and your product is that it is more of an experience, right? You've got, a QR code to really interesting art on some of your packaging. And so talk to me a little bit about, balancing having an upscale experience with also developing a really awesome product.
Well, that's a great question. So when we launched, we showed just the art and the QR code on our boxes, and we weren't selling well. And I was like, what's going on? Like, our product's amazing. I think our branding is really cool, but we just weren't moving. And I realized really quickly we had to show the food on the front of the box. And right when we made that change, our velocity shot up. And, now we're selling through really well. Our velocities are great. Things changed really starkly. And I think that just speaks to the fact that the experience is so, so important. But if someone doesn't know what the food looks like, if someone isn't excited about trying the food, they're not going to engage in that experience in the first place. So I think, for us, it's a balance, because we're showing the food on the boxes, but then we also have this really fun, cool experience when you scan that QR code. So it's definitely a balancing act. But what I would say I've learned is, if your food looks good and it tastes good, lead with the food.
Yeah, absolutely. You heard it, guys, from a really successful new entrepreneur. Griffin, thank you so much on participating, with sharing your product. It's amazing. And your thoughts on the issue as somebody who's kind of living and breathing it every day. I think it's also reiterating the importance of some really good market research, guys, right? So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Dana. Well, I wonder if we can put up on the screen, Tasha, our product of the month, which perhaps won't be surprising, is the amazing Mezcla bars, which I have with me here as well. So now we've had a question already about whether these are available yet in the UK. Unfortunately, they're not, unless I send you a very special package over. But you can see here some of the fantastic bars that keep me going during the day. So if we go on to the next slide, any of our US audience who are watching today, Griffin has very kindly offered us a special discount. So write it down now. You can use the code MESH15 and you can get 15% off at the checkout, or you can use the URL at the bottom. We will be sending out videos, and we'll be sending out the actual the recording later, so you will be able to see it. But anyone who can't wait, like me, you might actually want to write that down. So at this stage, I think we'll go into the Q&A, and I could see lots coming in. So Dana, what have we got on the Q&A?
Yes. Wow, lots. I think I want to start. Let's see. Leslie had a question, which I thought was really interesting, around vegan or veganism versus vegetarian. So Natasha or Hugh or Fiona, did we see much differentiation between the perceptions and attitudes of those two things? Those who claim to have been vegan, or what they feel about veganism versus vegetarianism? Or is that something that maybe we can think about continuing to look into?
I think
that would be great. Tasha, over to you, because I think, yeah, you were about to say something and you're deep into the data. I'm going to be deep into my bar.
I think that it's definitely something that we can dive into further, but I think something that initially grabs me just from that thought is that we have a lot more people just in our pre who are immediately saying that they are vegetarian. So it's already a much higher abundancy. I think when you look at our individual experiences within our diary, the vast majority of the perhaps more negative experiences are stemming from vegan as opposed to vegetarian. And I think that part of that is people's in a bit or a misunderstanding as to what is the difference between the two.
Yeah. Hugh, any thoughts from your end on that?
Well, just also picking up some of the chat discussion, plant-based does seem to find a bit of a way around it sometimes. So those kind of, what I was calling, identity associations of vegan. Scott in the chat was commenting, some of his mates don't like the idea of the vegan lifestyle, and we're getting a fresh start, I think, with plant-based that doesn't have those associations. So yeah, we did intend to do a deep dive into this, and helpfully, actually, the other day, Fiona, Tasha and I were having discussions about questions, and we've made sure we've got one on plant-based as well as vegan, because and someone said, hang on, aren't they the same thing? And we said, no, they're perceived differently. So we'll be collecting data on that in the next month.
Yeah,
that's great. And thank you to Hugh. Hugh has been inputting to our tracker. We are continuing to collect the data. We'll be collecting more information. So again, very happy to hear from anybody else in terms of what you're interested in, so we can see if we can pop that into.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got an interest in this from a research point of view, of course, and indeed I have a PhD student on the call, Mylene Struck. So hello, Mylene, who's looking into how you can reduce meat consumption. And another thing that I think it'll be interesting to deep dive into is the kind of emotional angle. I was interested in your comments on hope. I think you were picking up on hope earlier, Fiona. We did some piloting on COVID with masks, where we tried, instead of a neutral government appeal of, wear your mask as we tell you to, we tried playing with different emotions, and we tried playing with hope against fear. And they both work really well as compared with a neutral thing. The fear one, yes, it had graves, and it did work. You'd have to be a brave brand to go that way. But the hope one worked, which had images of people coming out of hospital, everyone clapping, and we can get through this. That worked even better, and we found that with pride and guilt as well. Pride tends to beat guilt, so I think that'll be an interesting thing to zoom into that in this vegan case.
Yeah, really interesting. There's another question that I'm going to open up to everybody here on our panel, which I thought was really interesting. And it is our view on the relative, so the pro-social or the ethical benefits of switching a larger number of non-vegetarians to vegetarians or flexitarians versus converting the smaller number of people to veganism. What are our thoughts on that? I'm sure.
There's a just very quickly, there's a data related thought, which is just, from a point of view of carbon and land, the biggest problem is ruminant meat, and it's beef, and then there's a big gap, and then there's lamb, and then there's another big gap, and then there's everything else. So the big win is more people eating less meat, really. From a climate and land use point of view, they're the biggest win. But cheese is a bit nasty too. It's not, so I've been motivated to think about the next step, but that's the biggest switch.
I was going to say the same thing, right? Less consumption is the goal, I think, overall. How consumers get there, that's less of a, I think, overall our main concern, but less consumption overall of those products would be my thought. Any other thoughts from Fiona or Tasha on that one? Or Griffin too, feel free to jump in.
I have to admit, I was answering a question around something that Verity was asking on this call. So my apologies for not being as attentive as I should have been. But very interested, Verity, in what you're saying about Mike Berners-Lee and his passionate plea for marketing people to help sell the need to make significant adjustments to living. So really interesting on that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Let's see. Where did we see this one? Okay, is there a valid distinction between meals and lifestyle? Huh, that is interesting. I think my peer group sees environment and decarb as ancillary benefits rather than a starting point, similar with electric cars. So do we see a valid distinction between meals and lifestyle? I would say, Scott, that's one thing that I picked up on early in doing this, and that I thought that there would be more lifestyle conversation happening here. But again, I might be quite biased because I have been vegan for many years and vegetarian for many, many years before then. But did we see any distinction, Tasha?
I think that may come back into what Hugh was talking about, the difference between our experience diary data saying it's about senses and enjoyment, which I suppose plays more into the meals aspect, and perception, where it could be considered a lifestyle choice. I think for everyday people, if they're willing to make that change, it's just about doing little things here and there. And eventually you wake up and go, oh, my lifestyle has changed without me noticing it. And I think a huge part of that comes into the products that businesses are putting out there, that like we saw with the beauty category, that people were using vegan products without even realizing they were using beauty products.
Yeah, for sure. Very good point.
And that's very much the case in the kind of commercial food and drink as well, in the workplaces and so on, that you can just gradually make a big difference without anyone even noticing. We're looking at this in Warwick at the moment, and you can just take beef off the menu and people don't even notice if you've got other attractive options, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Efficacy first of product, right? Last question. I'm going to pass this one over to Fiona because this is really on the methodology, and it is all around this methodology being really potent in uncovering latent attitudes. But do we feel that it may have a use case as a predictive tool when tracking cultural changes, as opposed to having kind of just a snapshot of MR?
That's a really interesting question. I would hope that it would have some predictive aspects to it, because we can already see just from diving into the data for this first webinar that you can see the difference between people's perceptions about, say, veganism and when they were encountering vegan products in the wild. And if we can take some of those clues, we might be able to start seeing what do we really believe? If people are really enjoying these products and they're coming across these products and they're trialing these products, maybe it's not so much a question of how many people switch to being a vegan or switch to being a vegetarian, but how fewer meat meals are being eaten, because actually people are kind of enjoying other things. So I would hope that it would help there. The other bit that when we were talking earlier, Dana, with your earlier question, I was wondering whether the reason behind people's feelings, so if they have become vegan because of climate change or because of animal welfare, does that mean that they are more likely, for example, to look out for non-leather products in other areas of their life, or beauty products that they actively go out to look for? as opposed to those people who perhaps are tasting plant-based foods, really enjoying them and incorporating more of those into their lifestyle. So we should have a look at how we can use this to be predictive. But in other studies, we have found that experiences today are predictive of people's attitudes and behavior tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think also commenting back on something that Hugh had mentioned during these slides is about around social identity radically shifting moment to moment, right? And you know, where we show up, what parts of ourselves we bring in different moments, in different scenarios, changes. And so, yeah, I think tracking that over time and seeing the implications more from that cultural or semiotic view would be really interesting too. We've got a couple minutes left, and I know there was some questions in the chat. I'm not sure if you or Hugh, I know you've answered maybe one of them, but I see one from Jeremy around, do you think that some consumers who are unable to go full vegan, we may have some on this call, won't even bother with vegetarianism because they can't really fully commit and feel that maybe, you know, I'm not going to worry with that at all. I think that's another interesting cultural and societal view. So Hugh, what's your take on that? Open, you're on mute.
I do apologize. I didn't hear that. I was distracted by something Leslie was saying in the chat.
Gotcha.
Do you want to ask someone else or repeat the question?
Yeah, no. So it's all around, you know, what about people who can't go full vegan? Or do you think that, you know, they may not even attempt to vegetarianism, for example?
Yeah, I was just chatting about that in the chat, actually.
Yeah.
There's a massive danger of depressing people if we kind of set a bar too high. I mean, clearly we do need to set a bar too high, but we have to get there through positive reinforcement. It's just like teaching. When we, you know, and this is technically why I actually prefer the positive route of emotions like pride, because we found that pride and guilt will both motivate someone to do the right thing next time. You know, if you say, well done, last time you did something right, that will motivate people. You naughty girl for doing the wrong thing, that will motivate people. But if you have too much guilt in a row, it can damage a variable called one's self-accountability, which is a psychological variable that basically means the extent to which I feel it's my job to live up to my own values. People kind of give up. And it also damages something called their self-efficacy, which is, you know, the extent to which I feel I can make a difference, change my behavior, and other nasty psychological variables. So we do actually need to find ways of helping customers do the right thing and then give positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I think that's really, I mean, we saw that in a webinar we did and data we did all around Crave, right? And encouraged marketers and advertisers to, you know, elicit craveable moments with positive outcomes, because although the behavior might be similar, it will not be as long lasting. And there will also be other implications in you know, tuning into negative, the negative. Right. So thank you. Well, I know we're just about at time. So I think, you know, we've got some things to think about. We've had a really, really amazing chat. Tasha, if you just want to pull up what maybe we can expect in January, you know, some thoughts of what we might be going into. We really want to look into the implications, right? Let's get into a little bit more of the data, the stats, the analytics. But as we have done, or as we have talked with everybody, I mean, I think we've had a really great conversation. Reach out to Fiona and I if there are different things that you'd like us to look into, different areas to explore, if you'd like to participate. So we'd love to hear from you even after this, this call. So Fiona, over to you to close us out on time.
Thank you, Dana. And a very big thank you to everybody for attending this, our first vegan mesh up. We do hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you'll be with us for the next one. And a big thank you to Hugh Wilson and to Griffin Spalansky, our guests today. And we look forward to seeing you all in January.